Hey everybody, this is Jess, and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different for the YouTube channel. This is a video idea that was suggested to me from somebody who had messaged me on Tumblr, and they were kind of asking my opinions about certain other ships besides the ones I had posted about before, and they thought it might be fun to do a video where we the um, talked about the different ships that you could possibly have in Kimi ga Shine, and just kind of talk about like my thoughts on them and things like that, like how canon I think they are, or how much I like them, or whatever. And I thought that sounded kind of fun, and I mentioned it to another one of my friends, and her reaction to that was just like, oh my god, yes please, that sounds really fun. So I decided to put that together. So we're gonna go ahead and go through each of the different combinations of characters. We're gonna start with the main characters, and then we'll branch out to the other characters, so like the various dolls and the sort of like background characters, like the people from other people's pasts who have names and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit about that, and maybe do some like light rare power hour stuff as well. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to see more stuff like this, then let me know. I just thought that it would be kind of something sort of fun to do occasionally, with a more sort of opinion-based sort of thing, I think. And yeah. So anyway, let's go off with all of the Sara ships first. So I'm gonna say the name of the ship, and then give my thoughts on it, okay? So, first one, Sara JYOU, or JYOU Sara, as a lot of people call it. I'm not a huge fan of this one as a ship romantically, but as a bro TP, it's great. I feel like for this one, the narrative trope really goes out of its way to sort of establish that Sara and JYOU don't have any romantic connection, and all of the options to make them romantic are at best sort of like, I don't know, I guess like what is the word I'm trying to think of? And at best they're like vague, like ridiculously vague. So, for that reason, I feel like it's probably not intended to be canon. Just because it goes out of its way so far to say no, and not in that like cutesy sort of like, shoujo anime way of, oh, will they, won't they, haha, tsundere, but like, no, it's more like they just literally do really love each other, but not romantically. And I really like that about it. It's pretty rare to find a really strong, intimate male-female friendship in things, and so I really, really like their friendship a lot. Not as much of a fan of them romantically, though. Next we have Sara KEIJI. Now, there are a lot of people who are big fans of Sara KEIJI, and a lot of people who really dislike Sara KEIJI, and I mean, however you feel about it, that's cool, as long as you're not, like, giving people shit. But basically, for this one, I kind of feel like this is actually going to be like a canon ship. I kind of feel like this is moving in a direction where there's a lot of hints being dropped about it. There's a lot of, like banter back and forth between the two. It's not really my cup of tea necessarily, but I can definitely see where people are coming from, and based on knowing various like shipping tropes and things like that, not just in the West but also Japan, it seems like it's one of those ones where it's like, damaged, like experienced guy and like fiery, like younger person. It's pretty common like in BL circles, I think, too, from what I've seen, where you have like your like jaded, like, seen the world kind of character, and then the younger one who's like still full of like fire and grit. And that's kind of seems to be like what's going on with this, where Sara's bringing like the passion side of everything, where she's like, yeah, we got to do this and stuff like that, and KEIJI's like, oh wow, that's really like inspiring to me, because I'm so disillusioned with everything, with the very topical theme of, wow, I'm very disillusioned with how corrupt the police are. um, so yeah. Yeah, this one I definitely could see becoming canon. I feel like there's a lot of evidence there, and it seems like you could have a really like solid canon basis for it. Sara Mishima. Now this one is definitely in crack ship territory. Uh, I don't think that, I mean, they have interactions just based on the fact that like you're playing as Sara, and so any interaction you have with like Mishima at all is going to be Sara having that interaction with him. But I don't know. I don't really feel like there's a whole lot of like, I mean, I could definitely see if you wanted to ship it, it could have like this sort of like goofy mad professor and like, you know, straight man, like strict wife kind of like dynamic where it's like they really love each other, but you know, the wife is just like, oh my god, you are so like, you know, out of it all the time. It's particularly with the thing about like ragging on him about smoking. Um, and I think that would be really funny. I also find it really funny the interactions they have in the side game where it's like he's like, "Oh, don't worry, I can teach you to do art," and then he's like, "Oh my God, Sara, no, I can't." So that's pretty funny. Yeah, I don't know. This one is not really all that appealing to me personally, but I think it could be a really like fun crack ship for some people. Um, I just really really like the idea of regardless of dynamic, Sara and Mishima just like hanging out. Like that's really funny to me. All right, next, Sara now. So Sara now is something that I think I do actively kind of ship. It's now is a character archetype that I don't usually really like. This sort of like, you know, shy, timid, like, oh, I suck, but I, you know, I'm gonna try anyway, and we'll get to that more with Kanna, um, obviously. But I have to say that during the second part of the game, chapter two, she really grew on me, particularly with like having to do the attractions. And I did all of the attractions with every single combination of people multiple times, and I lost every one of them, and I won every one of them, and I spent a lot of time doing that stuff in chapter two, and I think during that I really did start to appreciate now. And I think with the bad end with now, where she convinces Sara to um, choose her and she's the sacrifice and then they're the only two that get to survive, that I really liked because that showed kind of like a more like desperate selfish sort of side to her, and that's what I really dig in characters is when they're messy and not nice. And so for me that really made me like now. This is just me breaking down now as a character now. So anyway, I really like that ending because you know, it's very sort of like homoerotic if you're gonna look at it through Yuri goggles. I don't know why I pronounced that wrong. Yuri goggles. But Sara and Now, I do kind of like them. I like them a lot, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to REKO. But I really do like Sara and Now as like Now kind of like attaching yourself to Sara because she's stronger, and sort of like is inspiring her, especially in the absence of Mishima, and she doesn't have anyone else to kind of like look up to. And that is kind of like a dynamic I really like, you know, where it's, you know, even though Now's character type of being like, you know, the sort of like weak, like worrywart character is not one that I'm super into. Depends on how it's done. Sometimes I do really like him, like KEIJI from Digimon, I love to death. And I've been thinking about him recently because of the new reboot bearing. But yeah, I really liked the sort of like very genuinely intimate sort of like um, conversations and interactions that they had. Because it seems like Now does really care about everybody else and is kind of like, you know, very empathetic, and so this situation is very difficult for her. And since she's quote unquote not supposed to be there, just like with Joel, it's kind of a really interesting dynamic too to think about, like her surviving with Sara, who has the highest chance of winning. So I don't know, I like that. Next, Sara So. So everybody who knows me and has watched my playthrough of this knows that I'm not the biggest Soul slash Sheen fan, but I do think that this is like a ship that has a lot of really like interesting dynamics to it. I think that it's really good if you like that sort of antagonistic sort of shipping thing, which usually is my jam. Where it's like the characters can't stand each other, they can't fully trust each other, but there's this like magnetism that pulls them together. I love that shit, and so do a lot of other people. And if I didn't dislike Soul, um, as a like character himself, I would probably be really into this particular ship. But as it stands for me, not really a big thing, but it is really, really meaty, and there's a lot of good possibilities there, particularly if you choose to sacrifice Kanna at the end of chapter 2, because now you have Soul being like really like angry, and he no longer just like distrusts Sara and is afraid of Sara, but now he's like legit like pissed. And so now it's tipping over into, please forgive me for this expression, but I'm a dirty homestuck. It tips over into full on like Black Rom, and man, do I love that shit. That's great. So I think this is I think this is also one of those ships where it's like it's definitely ship teased by canon, because you're in this sort of like, if you're playing as Sara and then you've got like KEIJI and So here, and it's sort of like a Team Edward, Team Jacob sort of setup where, you know, they're both coming with baggage, but it's different baggage, and depending on your flavor of favorite baggage, like which one do you like better. Um, so it's a little bit more interesting, I think, in nuance than Twilight, but I do sort of get the same vibe from it, where it's being set up that way as this sort of like weird, um, you know, competing for Sara's trust and cooperation. And if you want to ship it, and you want to ship it in a sort of like weird fucked up OT3, which again I am all for, you you could do that and it would be really interesting. Um, so yeah, I think that would be a really, really interesting one to do. And yeah, yeah. Okay, next we've got Sara Kanna. Sara Kanna is one of those ones where it's sort of like, if you like the whole like um Marimite sort of dynamic with like, you know, little sister looking up to One-chan kind of thing, um, then you could get this one. And I think if you do that sort of like sort of like a younger, sort of like weaker person looking up to a stronger person thing, which sometimes I'm into. I did like it in the Marimite sense, you know, where it's like, you know, the person is looking up to the One-sama, and I do really like the sort of like dynamic there. Kanna herself, not that crazy about her as a character. It's she's just very like cloying in a lot of ways, and I usually don't tend to like bully bait characters generally. You know, where like they're sad and everybody's mad at everyone, like makes fun of them and they cry a lot and whatever, and it's like my feelings on Sumiki are pretty much the same. She makes me really uncomfortable, but I think that like as sort of like a ship with that like, you know, sort of non-related sister dynamic thing, I don't know how else to phrase it, it's pretty interesting. And I think it's also one of those things where it seems to have some canon basis, because Kanna really latches on to Sara, and also to So, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but she seems to be kind of filling that sort of slot of like, you know, looking up to and idolizing someone. I think my preferred dynamic for this one would be like, it's one-sided, and Kanna is really into Sara, but Sara doesn't see her that way, and so she's got to kind of like deal with the feelings of rejection that come from that, and also the you know, feelings of I guess, god, how do I want to phrase it, I guess the feelings of frustration that might come along with that too. So yeah, I don't know, we'll have to see. Next up is Sara QTAROU. This one also strikes me as kind of crack shippy, and I kind of find it really like interesting, and kind of hilarious, because I think QTAROU and anybody is really hilarious. But anyway, so I like the whole idea of Sara and QTAROU, because Sara is all about like, you know, oh, thinking ahead and like thinking on her feet and having like really good like planning skills and being smart, and then QTAROU is more sort of like the other end of that, where it's he can react in the moment, but he's very reactionary. He's not like a planner kind of thing. And I usually tend to like that dynamic as well, where you have somebody who's really on top of stuff, and then someone else who kind of like, you know, they're more kinetic than anything else. And I think it's fun too, because like Sara and QTAROU also have like really like quick tempers, And they also have I mean, and most people in this have this as well, but Sara and QTAROU, because they're both orphans. And Sara is like the privileged orphan, like the Oliver Twist story where she gets adopted into like a really like affluent family. And then QTAROU is very much kind of clawed his way up from the bottom and aged out of the system, which in Japan is really, really rough. I think that would be a really interesting sort of dynamic. I'm a little bit hesitant on it myself, just because it's a very similar dynamic to the one my parents have, where my mom grew up dirt poor and my dad grew up with like central air conditioning in like 1950 something or 1963 or whatever. So like it's also what I like to refer to my parents' relationship as like the Team Rocket dynamic. But yeah, I think if you didn't have that sort of baggage coming to it, I think you could really enjoy this ship quite a bit. And it seems like it would be a lot of really funny stuff. With Mishima, I think you'd have a lot of like a manzai kind of approach to it, where it's like QTAROU says something funny and then Sara like snipes at him or whatever. And I think that could be kind of like a funny thing as well. Sara REKO. So I like Sara REKO. I think now in this one I like it for the opposite reason that I like Sara now or Sara KANNA. And it's why I kind of like the Sara now REKO OT3 sort of thing. And it's cuz REKO and Sara are both very like proactive sort of people. They're very like, going for it and getting stuff done and everything else. Whereas whereas Reiko is just way more sloppy. I think maybe it's similar to like the QTAROU thing too, where it's like she's very reactionary and she's not like a thinker or a planner, whereas Sara does tend to be. And so I kind of like that that sort of like interplay between the two, where it's like, Sara is actually making Reiko less not dangerous, but like less impulsive, and is like kind of like teaching her to like rein it in a bit, which is the opposite of what she's doing with Nao and Kanna. So that's why I kind of like the Sara and Nao Reiko sort of like thing. But anyway, I think it's really interesting, and it has a lot of potential to be really there's a lot of potential for like conflict. And if you know anything about me, I usually prefer ships that have like high levels of conflict, where people are going to fight about stuff and people are going to have like hurt feelings over things and stuff like that, because I like stuff with conflict. That's my jam. But yeah, so anyway, I like this one. And yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's also interesting too because like Reiko is like famous, and therefore her relationship to like being well known would be similar to Sara's, and so I think they could probably bond over that and the sort of like level of being in the public eye kind of deal, even though it's not immediately obvious to Sara at the beginning, kind of like with QTAROU and her finding out that she's adopted kind of deal. Although I don't know that she actually knows that yet. I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've played chapter 3, so I'll have to double check that. But yeah. Okay, next up we have Sara Kai. Sara Kai actually again seems like it's one of those ones where it's kind of set up to be semi-canon or implied to be canon, at the very least on a one-sided basis. One of my big things that I love is like sort of like loyalty kink, where it's like you have one partner who's like wholly devoted to the other one to the point where it's like super unhealthy. I love that in fictional shipping, not so much in real life. In real life it's not great, but in fictional shipping, holy shit, give me that stuff. And so you have Kai, who's sort of like the devoted servant to Sara, and then Sara's sort of like the whole like lord sort of deal. So for this one, it seems like a no-brainer, right? Like there's definitely a basis there for it. There's definitely a lot of canon interaction here. You can get in the really nice angst angle of like Kai is in love with her but doesn't think she'll return it, and maybe she doesn't return it that way, but you know, whatever, because she has really complicated feelings about it because she doesn't even know about Kai's existence until like the game starts. So you could do that. You could write a thing and make it more like a Kuzupeko kind of situation. If you wanted to go back, there's a lot of potential in this one, and I think it could be really really cool. It would also be really interesting too if you wanted to do like sort of a more like domestic AU thing, just because like Kai's whole thing is Kai is like a a homemaker, and Sara is obviously not set up to be traditionally feminine, and so I think that would be kind of a neat like sort of like spin on usual traditional gender roles in marriage in Japan. And that I think is also really worth exploring as well if you wanted to do like an AU where either like they both survive the game or you know whatever, and or the game doesn't happen or whatever. And I think that'd be really interesting. Sara Geen. So Sara Geen is one of those ones like with Joe, I like it a lot as a bro TP. I don't like it so much as a romantic ship, but I'm sure some people do. And I mean, like they have a lot of like very they have a lot of like interpersonal sort of like interactions in canon, so it makes sense that there's probably people out there who like Sara Geen. Um, and kind of like with Kanna, the way that I sort of imagine how this one would go is like Yin has this huge crush on Sara, and maybe he like goes and like confesses it, or like he goes up to her and is like, you know, I want to marry you, nya, or whatever. And Sara's like, haha, cute, and like pats him on the head, and then like, you know, like 10 years later or whatever, he comes back and she's like, oh no, he's hot. Um, that I think would be something kind of funny and sort of cute. But yeah, I think it would be kind of interesting. There's a lot of like stuff established where Geen and Sara are have like sort of like a brother sister relationship. I'd say similar to like Kanna and Sara being like sisters. Um, but with Geen, it seems like he's way more proactive, and whereas Kanna, you kind of have to share her with So, you don't have to share Geen, and Geen is pretty much just like automatically on your side no matter what. Um, and I don't know. I just find like their dynamic really adorable. And I like it because there's not a ton of there's a lot of stuff in media about like older brothers and younger sisters having kind of like a cute sibling dynamic, but not as many with older sister younger brother. And you know, this is one that I really like a lot. Like I said, from a romantic standpoint, I generally kind of think about it like Yin would be like one-sided crush, and then later, like he grows up, and then Sara meets him again, and is like, oh my god, like you know, wow, I never thought of you this way before, but now I do. And Yin would be like, oh, but I'm you know, I kind of moved past that, but then like they re-meet and they're like, oh no, I still actually do kind of have feelings for you. It's a very uh god, it's a very like Neil Breen sort of scenario where it's like your childhood crush and then you meet them later in life. But it's I think that would be kind of like an interesting way to do it, and I could definitely see that happening in canon, maybe depending on how the rest of the story goes. um so yeah. All right, last one is Sara Alice. Sara Alice is really interesting to me because Alice is this very like funny character where he thinks very highly of himself, and his main thing is like making sure that Reiko's okay, and he's just like completely racked with guilt. And I love it because Sara also is racked with guilt after chapter 1 because of Joe's death. And she sort of like, you know, gets some closure at the end of chapter 2 if you decide to kill Soul, but at the same time, she does still carry guilt about all of the people who have died. And so I really like the idea of them sort of comforting each other and then bonding over the guilt they feel. And particularly if we're in a timeline like mine where Reiko died, I think that's a really, really interesting sort of character interaction. And the guilt as a motivator. I'm gonna quote writing professors from grad school when I was getting my MFA, and he was like, guilt is a powerful motivator. Never forget that. And I haven't. So basically, I think this would be a really interesting one. I don't actually think Alice is set up to be a ship tease for Sara, like officially. It's not the sense I get, but I would say that it does. It's probably the one that I like the most, I guess, out of Sara and like the guys. Um, yeah, I think that's probably the one I like the most out of Sara and the guys. Um, because it's just, I don't know, there's so much potential for angst and like, fighting over stuff and miscommunications and, just like people being messy and awful, and I love that. So okay, yeah, that's all of the oh, I forgot about background people. So I always have my crack ship of Sara Miley. Um and I really like this one because again, I really like I love Black Rom and hating each other, which is one that I, especially if it's like nasty women. And so I know that like Miley's kind of like, you don't know a ton about her, and there's not a ton that you could do with that we know, and that she hasn't like demonstrated a lot of like character growth necessarily. But man, I like to fill in blanks where they are, so I'm all about Sara Miley. Um, there's also Sara Sophalin. Sara Sophalin. I also sort of like. I like it because it's like Sarah's with this particular character who is treating her nicely but also keeps sniping at her, and she doesn't know whether or not to trust her or not. And on one hand she pities her, but on the other hand she's like, I hate you. And that really kind of like complex sort of feeling, I think, is really important. I think also on Safalin's side, it seems like she has some sort of like internal conflict over what's happening in the game to these people, and so I sort of feel the same way about her as well, where she'd be feeling mutually about that about Sara. I think also um, the oh right, yeah, there's also like a lot of like, like Safalin's sort of like gone mentally in a certain way, where she's missing certain parts of like her empathy or whatever you want to call it, which I think is kind of interesting because Sara is so focused on like retaining her humanity, and sometimes she does slip up, and so I think it would be a kind of interesting sort of like leading her down like the evil path kind of thing, similar to like with Miley, but not as obvious. Um, oh, okay. Sara Ranger. So Sara Ranger, I think would be a really interesting ship as well. Not one that I personally would necessarily be in, but it is pretty like straight black rom. It's also, you could get into sort of like the meaty sort of deal with him versus his feelings of being like left alone and not enjoyed, or not enjoyed. What am I trying to say? Um, with his feelings of like being uh God, what are they called? His feelings of being like abandoned, and his like sort of like Pinocchio syndrome where he wants to be a real boy, and so like he's jealous of Sara and all the attention she's getting, and she feels pity for him, and I think that would be kind of an interesting one as well. uh Next we have Sara Ryoko. Sara Ryoko is something that I do unironically actually ship, because that's my Sara best friend ship uh of choice. And I think like I like also the idea of like Sara is in love with Ryoko but can't say anything to her about it because of, I don't know, homophobia or whatever her reasons are, or she doesn't want to lose their friendship or something. And so Joe starts dating her, and now it's all this angsty stuff where it's like the two of them invite her out all the time because they love her to death too. And like it's angsty because Ryoko is like, oh, I also want to be with Sara, but I don't think she feels that way about me. And then Joe is like, oh, I do really like Ryoko, but she's sending off these clear signals she likes Sara. And he also knows that Sara's interested in her, but he doesn't know how to fix it. And like it's a whole big like messy triangle thing, and I love that shit. um Ryoko is not present in the traditional sense, but she's very present in the narrative, and that's interesting to me on a very like deep level. Um, so yeah. Anyway, so we're gonna talk about next the thing of Sara and Kugie. Sara and Kugie are a really interesting dynamic to me. I think it would be really interesting because of Sara seems to have this very like natural older sisterly quality to her, whereas it seems like Kugie had to learn how to do that. And I think that's fascinating. Like that's so interesting. And then it would be interesting because then you'd have Kanna there, and then Kanna would also have a crush on Sara, but her sister is dating her, and she feels guilty about that, and then like Kugie feels guilty because she knows Kanna has a crush on Sara, but she doesn't care enough to like give her up. I love these sort of like really interesting triangle scenario type things. There's also the thing too where if Sara and Kugie had been together at some point in the past, then there would be the whole like grief section reaction to when Kugie dies, which again all about. um, all right, so next up is Sara Nantaro. Sara Nantaro is another one where I definitely think it's being like intentionally teased. Um, Nantaro had a very different personality from what I was expecting. I was expecting him to be sort of like a cross between like QTAROU and Alice, where he's like, the like stereotypical like bad kid, whatever, like a fucking Kuwabara kind of thing. But I was pleasantly surprised that he actually seems to be a lot more level-headed. And it seems like for him and Sara, he'd be the one reining her in. And that's sort of an interesting dynamic, I think. I do sort of like the idea that like he was keeping things from her because he couldn't fully trust her, and he was a little bit conflicted about like his own existence. And I think Sara sort of like empathizing with that but not fully trusting him would be a really interesting way to go. That would be really, really cool. Um, oh, right. Next is Sara Megumi. Sara Megumi would be really interesting for the same reasons that Sara KEIJI is kind of interesting, except we know that Megumi is 100% corrupt, and so it would be more sort of like a Sara Miley situation where she's starting to like influence Sara and lead her down the wrong path or whatever, and then KEIJI's all upset about it because he's like, no, like I was hoping that she'd be better than this. And I think that would be really fun. Would be kind of interesting actually to see like if Megumi could be like really like manipulative and say the right things to convince Sara that what she's doing is right, because it seems like she was sort of doing that with KEIJI. I wonder if maybe she also had internal conflicts about this kind of thing like KEIJI, but she's been in the force longer, or it's because she's like a female officer and she had to work harder to get to where she is, or she's in a position of power so she stands more to lose if she calls out the corruption. And I think that would be really interesting because Sara has such like a staunch sense of justice thing. So it would be interesting to either see her sort of lead Sara into more um being more like, what's the word I'm looking for, like corrupting her, versus like Sara being like, oh, this is wrong and I care about you, but I feel so betrayed about how you feel about me. Similar a little bit to like the KG situation where the betrayal really hurts, and then trying to save her and possibly failing. And I think I really like that sort of interaction as well. Next up we have Sara Mai. Sara Mai, I don't know, I don't. Mai's interesting because Mai like pulls that heel turn at one point and is like, obviously she's very bubbly outwardly, and then um underneath is more sinister. And I could totally see like Sara trying to like investigate her, and then sort of like feeling bad, and maybe like they have like an intimate conversation or something comes up, and then she feels a little bit more sort of like connected to her, and then she betrays her and it feels like bad man. I could see that happening. I think I would really have to sort of see more of Mai to get a better sense of how I would want to rare pair them. Because it is a little bit crack shippy, and I don't know, I'd have to see more of Mai to get a sense of how it would work. But yeah, my main thing right here is betrayal. That seems to be the theme at the moment. All right, next we've got Sara Shinsuke. So Sara Shinsuke would be kind of interesting because Shinsuke seems to be like a huge fucking coward, and Sara is not. And that would be sort of an interesting go between where like maybe he's inspired by Sara and has like feelings for her or whatever, but he can't work up the courage to say anything to her about it, and she's constantly pushing him to be better and stuff like that. And I think you could probably build a ship around that pretty easily. I don't know if anyone actually does ship this. I'm sure somebody does, right? Like, there's got to be somebody out there. But I don't have a whole lot of material for this one. We just haven't been with the victims for long enough yet, really, to get a big handle on their situation, which makes it a little bit tough. Sara Naomichi. So Sara Naomichi is an interesting ship because Naomichi ended up being what I thought Ranmaru was gonna be. And I was like, huh, oh, I see. Naomichi, I think, is probably Naomichi and Megumi, I think, are the two characters that I find the most attractive out of the whole cast. But I think it would be really interesting to kind of have them in just like a straight black rom situation where it's like, I don't like you and I don't like you and you don't like me, but we're doing this. Maybe there's like a situation where like, you know, Sara goes and saves him and then he has to sort of like reevaluate his outlook on life about not being just out for himself, and Sara still like views him with some distaste, but he's like a little bit warmer to her and so she's a little warmer to him. I think you could build it up that way and make something kind of interesting and nuanced out of it. Sara Anzu. So Sara Anzu is kind of similar to Sara Now or Sara Kanna, except Anzu is a lot more like mouthy than either of them. And Anzu also strikes me as just being fucking weird. And I love that. I love it when characters, especially girls, are just unrestrainedly fucking weird. Um, and so I think it would be kind of funny to have like, you know, Anzu and Sara, and they're like, Sara's like, oh, you know, this is my girlfriend, and I don't really get the whole clown thing, and maybe the clown thing freaks her out, and like, so Anzu has to like, you know, make sure that she leaves it aside or whatever from her routine or whatever when Sara's around or something. I don't know. It doesn't strike me as like a super like, I'm sure you could make something serious out of it, and like I said, it's these guys are tough because we don't know that much about them. So I'm kind of stuck here on this. But anyway, yeah, I figure that would be sort of like a more like funny sort of ship rather than something that would be more serious. Sara Hinako. Now, Sara Hinako I really like because Hinako seems like she's just so done with everybody. And since like Hinako's the one who killed herself in the video with Ranger, um, and she was like, oh yeah, you know, I wanted to die, but now she really doesn't want to die. And it just seems like she has so much going on with her own self about like trusting people and about like, you know, enjoying what's in front of her and like whether or not she actually wants to stay alive. And all this other stuff. And so I think that's really interesting, and that sort of like conflictedness I think could carry over really interesting in a relationship with Sara, where Sara also is very conflicted, where Sara's like, I want to get everyone out of here alive, but I also sometimes have to make these decisions where I have to shelve my empathy and my humanity for a minute, and you know, sometimes I get frustrated and angry and I want to just do something nasty because that's how I feel. And I think that would be kind of an interesting dynamic to have, where it's like Sara's fighting to stay optimistic and fighting to stay more, gosh, what's the word? Sara's fighting to stay more like, you know, hey, things can still work out, whereas Hinako's just there and just shooting it all down and being very pessimistic. And I love that kind of relationship too between people, where it's like somebody's trying really hard and then the other one is just like, yeah, no, this isn't gonna work, because they're very cynical. So I think that would be kind of interesting, and I think she would maybe like lead Sara astray, but in a different way from say like Megumi. where it would be something more along the lines of like making her more jaded. And whereas with Megumi, I feel like Megumi would do it in a way where it's less like direct. I think Hinako's just like unyielding pessimism could possibly get through to her at some point. And like Sara keeps trying to fix her and she can't, and it's really frustrating, and so it's making her angry and discouraged. And I think that would be a really interesting basis, to kind of look at like them, not even just as a romantic ship, but just in general. So. Alright, I think that is Sara paired up with every character in the game, for the most part. I left out, like, Real So, and, I mean, because it's basically just going to be a Black Rom thing. Um, and very similar to her relationship to, like, say, like, Miley or anyone else. Um, and I left off, like some other, like, really incidental characters, like her dad and stuff like that. Um, just because, like, I don't have enough about them to really have anything to say. um, but yeah, so I wanted to go through this and talk about all the ships for all of the Kimi ga Shine characters, but there's so many that this is going to end up being just a Sara ship video, and I guess I can make more of these if people are interested in hearing more, or if I want to do stuff and like I'm not set up to do a whole lot of like recording or whatever for gameplay. But I think this might be kind of fun to do one of these, like, maybe, like, every couple weeks or something like that. Just as sort of, like, an interesting break from everything else. And it also means it's something different from just watching me play games and stuff. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Like I said at the beginning, this is, you can have your own opinions on ships and stuff, and that's totally fine. Some things are my no TPs, some things, like, I really dislike or I think are, like, bleh, or whatever for various reasons. But I think it's important just to remember, like, these people ain't real, yo, and it doesn't really matter what happens to them. And it's a little silly to worry about, like, shipping when they're in a game where they're, like, stand to die in horrible ways. I don't ever understood that, like why everybody gets so bent out of shape about shipping in like death games of all things. But anyway, this is the thing for the Sara video. Thanks for joining me, guys. And if you have any requests or anything like that for who you want me to do next as a character, let me know. All right, everybody, talk to you later. Bye.